Nerdish Nerdy Nerd News.
Hi, and welcome to Nerdish Nerdy Nerd News. Come along and ride with us as we explore, discuss, and nerd-splain some of the most interesting topics of today.
Hey, I'm Tim. Hung around with nerds a lot growing up, hoping that it would rub off. I think it kind of did, because I'm kind of nerdish. And as always, my co-hosts.
Hey, thanks, Tim. I'm Christian. I've been playing and writing, creating games and Dungeons & Dragons since high school. My idea of a relaxing weekend is playing vids with my buds online. I also used to do complex math troubles with my dad for fun. I am very nerdy. And with us to help us understand the world a little better.
Hi, I'm Jess. I've been programming and using computers since the early 80s. I'm a voracious reader, consistently going through about 500,000 or more words a month. I've got some biochemistry in my background, and I've been using technology for as long as I can remember. I am the nerd. All right, we're back with another podcast.
We are. This will be, I think, 15, 16, somewhere in there, depending on what order we put them on. But this time we are talking with another guest. We've just kind of, passed over the fact that Tim's not here, which is sad for all of us. But
yeah, he's off with the Bromantics on their world tour. Well, wherever they're going. So
Western Canada tour, doing music and singing and entertaining the masses. So, so we are here with a journalist, Larissa Kurz. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on. I'm a print journalist. I worked previously here in Moose Jaw, which is how I know these guys. We crossed paths during my coverage days in the city, but I'm currently working at Regina with Post Media, and I'm a newspaper girl. That is my primary medium.
Print media.
Yeah.
The stuff that still exists.
Yes.
Thankfully.
We do.
In my mind.
We do.
Yeah, so we kind of brought you in here to talk about journalism and what's happening and how things are changing for you, how things are changing for the industry, because it is an industry. It's a commercial industry. Yeah.
It absolutely is. Yeah, and it's very much a business as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot going on. To be glib, it's a bit of a hot mess for some of us right now. But
yeah, we heard there were a few layoffs at the Post there, and a lot of the media is laying them off for, contractors or you know independent. What do you call them? Independent journalists who don't report to anyone. Yeah,
those freelancers, contract to contract, which is I'm sure very exciting way to make a living.
Yeah, without having the knowledge that you're going to be getting a paycheck, that might be a little difficult. So
yes, I've personally never chased that journey.
No.
My few jobs in the industry have always been staffed jobs, which I feel very lucky about. But
I think, in my opinion, is like a job like that, you're not chasing the next big thing. You're just trying to report on what's real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, yeah.
And not trying to sensationalize it or not trying to find the dirty scoop or, something that you can sell.
Absolutely. Yeah. Journalists we're unique creatures. We have this kind of unusual passion that I think not all career paths have. Like, I feel like most journalists go into what they do because we see it as something like a public service.
Mm-hmm.
We just really want to be the person or be the mouthpiece through which truth comes, making sure that people know the things that they want to know and deserve to know. And can be really hard to find out if you're not familiar or comfortable with some of those avenues. So to be a freelancer sounds terrifying, but to be a journalist in general is a little bit terrifying.
Well, and that's something I know a couple of our friends have asked about too, is as a journalist, have you seen a lot of people leaving because of threats and harassment? Because now you are publicly accessible. You are, people know who you are, where to find you. I remember, was it last year, year before at GAX, there was a bunch of stuff happening at the legislature, and the CTV crew that was there got a phone call while we were filming that morning.
They left.
And they left because the they were worried about them actually being able to get into the station because there was protesters out in front of the station. So do you see that as putting yourself at risk, or have you seen any other journalists that have quit because of harassment? And
what, harassment is absolutely a real thing.
Yeah.
I challenge you to find a journalist who hasn't gotten an angry email.
Get out of my house, Larissa.
Yeah. you get it. It appears in your inbox. If you're somebody who's present on social media in any way, there's a lot of kind of ugliness that can come from folks there.
Right.
Critiques about your coverage.
There's mean people online?
On Twitter?
Don't ruin the internet for me, Larissa.
Oh boy.
I love Twitter. I think it's a great tool. I think it's also a place full of a lot of things you don't want to have to cross paths with.
Yeah.
When you say it's a tool, the double meaning to that it is a tool that you can use like a hammer, or it's a tool that's just an idiot.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's harassment it's actually gotten to be a really big piece. Journalists are people who, like I said, we're very passionate about our jobs. We're not very well paid. And we often overwork ourselves quite a lot. And so burnout is a very real thing that a lot of us experience. It's something that's been on the rise in the last 10 years due to a lot of factors. Harassment is one of those factors. There's something like more than half of journalists experience some form of harassment during their career paths. Yeah. Something like 35% experience it like physically while they're on site doing their jobs. Somebody doing a TV stand-up or, a radio appearance, and they're actually out in public doing that. They get yelled at, they get heckled, they get, kind of approached by people who don't agree or have something they want to say. And I do think that it deters some people. I think it can be really hard to deal with.
It's like any customer facing job. Anything where you're in the public's eye, you are going to be the front line of abuse.
Absolutely.
And it's sad they can't have that civil discourse and basically just stand behind you and raise their hand and be like, hey, I want to speak about that next. No, they come at you as you're the cause of their problem.
Absolutely. I think the example that comes to mind for me over the past few years was the convoy that occupied downtown Ottawa. You saw a lot of videos pop up on Twitter from journalists who had been actually down in the streets trying to do their stand-ups, trying to talk to people and getting just a lot of rage back. Yeah. Even physical assaults in some cases.
And they're trying to tell both sides, and one side is attacking them.
It's a case of like, don't kill the messenger. I'm reporting information. Take it as you will, but I'm not the one that's causing it. I'm just telling you what's going on.
Yes, it's a tough position to be in sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen it, and I've kind of read a few books here, or read a few snippets from some books recently here, and a lot of it is, I think the anger sometimes comes from the commercialization of the news industry, right? And what people perceive as being, oh, well, this is a left-wing media. It's sponsored by all left-wing ads, or right-wing media, so they're not going to tell the truth because they're sponsored by right-wing, groups. And it's hard to find a non-biased media source.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but print media and television, but for the most part, print media, it's always had a bias. It's just, it hasn't been so far to the left or right, and there hasn't been that perception of being like that.
Well, because all media sources, like think 40 years ago, right? All media sources talked about the same thing. CBC, right. CTV, Global, like if you go back to when we were kids, those were your three main TV media sources, and then the Post and the Sun were left and right newsprint, and that was kind of it. And usually if it was a big enough story, the stories were equal across the board.
Absolutely. And I think some of it, I mean, like, you're right, there is absolutely kind of an inherent bias in media and in reporting and in the structure of outlets. I mean, bias is something that's almost impossible to escape.
Yeah,
right?
Like when I say bias,
humanity.
I don't mean that they're false news reporting, which is another issue altogether. But they're just taking a different slant on what they're saying. Or how they're, like, it may be this has happened and this is what this group's response was, but they don't show the other side of the response, right? So that would be advice.
But that's changed in our lifetime too, because when we were kids, a news article or a news story, whether it was in the paper or on the news, was 10 to 15 minutes on the news, and it was both sides.
Oh, yeah.
And they would interview both sides, and it wasn't just a snippet from, one person saying one thing inappropriate and then the other person saying all the good stuff. And it's like, no, it was two educated people are debating on live TV for 10 minutes about their topic, and the mediator was the media.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of what's maybe added to seeing maybe less of, I don't want to say less of that, because it still happens quite a bit on like TV mediums, because that's a viable place for that to happen. But the more we move on to these like digital print platforms, the harder it is to sometimes include all of those pieces, because you're restricted by space, you're restricted by word counts, you're restricted by time sometimes.
Yeah,
even.
well, it's the 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah,
now,
you're
right?
trying to get stories out
Yeah.
to be the first. You want to get that headline, you want to get the page clicks, you want your audience to
we know
come to
about
you.
page clicks.
Yes, yeah, you want your audience to come to you first, so you want to be at the front of dropping that story. Sometimes that makes it hard to collect all the pieces, because not everybody lives the life of a journalist. People have regular jobs.
Yeah.
People have families.
Yeah.
People can't take a phone call
Yeah.
at a whim second, Sometimes it can be hard to chase those pieces.
Well, I mean, a lot of times you'll see that story. Oh, and at the time of print, there was no comment from this, and this person, or this group and this group, and you're just like, well, then I'm not getting the whole story. But no one ever comes back to it, because the story had to get out there no matter what. And it's just, I mean, we've gotten into this, I think, a lot more with the whole Trump thing. It's exacerbated what was already there. Like, it's made it worse. So
I find too that there's kind of a rising distrust in legacy media outlets as well. Sometimes you will chase those other voices. You'll chase both sides of a story, but one side will come back and say, we're not interested in talking to you.
yeah.
They've made that choice. They have that right. Nobody is required to talk to media.
No.
Right? So
No, and that's where your job comes in, is to try and convince them, no,
Yeah.
we want to hear your side.
yeah, sometimes you do
Good
the
or bad.
legwork
Yeah.
and you still end up at that starting line
Yeah.
regardless.
Have you had any good stories where you've been able to talk someone into that and gotten their story out?
Oh, that's a great question. And I love, I hate it when people ask me about my stories, because my mind goes blank and I'm like, have I ever written anything?
Did I ever write anything ever?
What headlines are mine? I don't
I
even
like
know
dogs
anymore.
and cats.
I think that, at least as of late, the most relevant kind of stories that have involved that kind of experience have been about COVID-19. And it feels like a dirty word to bring it up, because I feel like it just invites so much ugliness my way as a journalist.
Very controversial.
It is.
Oh,
it
I've
is.
had COVID so many times. I'm so tired of it. I'm so tired of getting it. And both Jess and I, like, we're both fully vaxxed. But like, because I'm out in public constantly doing installs for a company that's in Saskatchewan that provides telephones. And
We've said many times who you work for.
yeah, I know. But because of that, and being out in public and 10 different houses a day, I'm bound to catch everything known to man.
I've been to quite a few press events where we've come back and that afternoon got an email saying somebody tested positive, so just watch yourself for symptoms. And but yeah, I was just saying, like, those COVID-19 stories, there's been a few that I recall coming out of our newsroom. I personally didn't write them because this was a little before my time. I'm still fairly fresh, but there's been a few where, like, for example, Nadine Wilson out of the legislature, she had kind of a controversy about her vaccination status and has now kind of separated from her prior affiliated party and started her own. I think her story was kind of one of those where we were there and we asked the question and said, do you want to tell us what happened? And she said, you know what? Yeah. I maybe don't like you as an outlet, but I'm going to talk to you because you asked.
And you were willing to just sit and listen
Yeah.
and not have your own, whether it's your own personal or your
Yeah.
own media bias, just listen to what she had to say.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes that's all it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's not an opportunity that you get. Sometimes you're out making cold calls and trying to chase people down in a sense. And so it's a little tougher to do, but...
Oh, so you're the paparazzi of Regina now, chasing people in your car.
So a question, how have you found, or how do I put this? Social media journalism. So those are the people on TikTok and whatever else they broadcast on.
I call them clickbait monsters, but
Yeah,
that's all they're looking for.
You know, they're the ones that wait and they're there when something happens and they're taking the selfie with it going on in the background, and then they have their own opinion. How is that, and I'm going to say it this way, how has that poisoned what you do?
I mean, I think it's absolutely had a big impact on the level of distrust of what I'm going to call legacy media. I feel like that's a term that people have heard before, but I'm talking, kind of that traditional, those mainstream outlets, groups like Postmedia who do the newspaper business. We mentioned CBC, like the TV stations, the radio stations. These are all companies, and our sole purpose is media production. And so we have in place standards and ethics and policies to kind of guide the way that we do that. Clickbaity stories are a lot looser with those things, of course, right? Because you're trying to get the clicks, you're trying to incite a reaction from people. But then it comes back to like some of those major outlets then grab that story and treat it as fact. And they've done like I say, they did it so much during the Trump campaign and leading up, and they weren't the Bob in her closet. It was CNN. It was Fox News. It was like major outlets treating a blogger's personal opinion as fact. Yeah, I think it's really kind of muddled the process of producing actual news content.
Yeah.
This is one of my quibbles with the term journalism, because it's a very umbrella term. It involves a lot of pieces, a lot of types of writing.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily get into like the nuance between like news reporting and opinions writing and
editorials
and and discussion pieces like groups like CNN do, where they kind of bring somebody on to do like a back and forth like we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I think that there's maybe not quite enough differentiating happening between sourced journalistic writing, like news writing, fact-based writing, and those kind of like engagement pieces.
They really get sort of muddled, mixed together. You'll be reading a news article and then you'll have the opinion piece in the middle of it. And then you'll get back to like another part of the article that's fact. And it tends to, and I've seen this even on like CBC or other ones and it's just like, well, why was that in there? That wasn't the news. That was what this person thought. Okay.
Yeah, like it's engaging content, right? I mean, I think there's a time and place for it, and I think it does have a lot of value in kind of keeping these discussions going with the public. But I also think they need to be like more clearly labeled. I feel like that's one of our problems that's kind of helping guide this distrust from the public is there's just not a lot of clarity
as to what it is,
as to what that means. And it maybe does play into like just general media literacy as well. Folks making those kind of connections themselves, but I don't know if we're helping.
Well, it's the misinformation, it's the propaganda, it's the, I mean, and this isn't new, because like I was reading a book here, The Democracy Without Journalism, written by Victor Piccard, and he was talking about ever since media started selling ads, which is going back to the 1800s.
Almost the birth of media.
Yeah. He said it's always had, it's never been able to be clarified as to what the story is, like what it is written about or who it's about, or like the facts are in there, but the opinion of the writer is in there as well. And whether he is being swayed by the money that's being given to him by that person directly as being paid for the story, or advertisement coming in and the boss going, well, don't do a story with him, go do a story with him. And as the journalist, you don't know. You're like, okay, I'll go talk to him. You've got it all set up. Is it, so it's not new.
It is not new.
It's just now we can start to see all the other sides of the story because we have access to it. Whether one side is louder than the other, that's kind of what comes through online. But you do have access to the full set of research papers from media outlets, from universities, from, all these things that can help you clarify where your opinion is. But yeah, it's funny. It is,
and it's very much a product of like I said, journalism, media production is a business, right? We are, the way that we work, it's a for-profit business model, right? And so we do rely on ad revenue. Yeah. We do rely on those partnerships to basically keep ourselves afloat, right?
Yeah. But hopefully not influence the production of the truth.
No, and I think but I think it boils down to, like I said, the journalist, right? Journalists tend to go into this career because we have this like feeling that we are doing a public service. We're trying to make sure that the public...
Oh, come on. It's for the paycheck.
The paychecks are not that big. I will reiterate. We do not get paid that well.
Well, we'll slip you the check under the table after this.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good. But yeah, it's kind of a gray area where we're like, we try to operate like a public service, but we're not, because we're not getting public service money, right? We're getting...
So have you ever been pressured yourself? And you don't have to say by which industry or which group, but have you ever been pressured yourself to write a story that you didn't think was right?
I don't think I've ever felt pressured to write a story that I didn't...
Like a certain way.
Yeah, like a certain way, like to slant it a certain way.
That goes to show something for the media outlets you have worked for, that you've never been pressured that way.
I feel really good.
I'm sure there's a lot of journalists out there who can't say that, who have been told, don't go interview this person.
Absolutely. I will say that I have written what we call advertorial pieces, which kind of hover on that line, like you said, between... because we pull in ad revenue and we have those partnerships with ad partners. I've written some of those pieces that I felt a little weird about because I think of journalism as like something that I'm trying to do for the benefit of the public. And so to write a story that's framed like a news story
about a company or
about a company, but as part of like an ad package. So it's essentially like a paid piece of copy. That's made me feel weird. I will admit that. But I've done it a few times, sometimes that's just part of the job. But I've never,
sold your soul.
Yeah.
I've to the devil.
Never felt like I was like just outright bald facing lying to people. It was just, paid content essentially.
Yeah.
Which again, journalism is an umbrella.
So another thing that has become across all of journalism is fake news.
Oof, that phrase gives me a little PTSD-like symptoms, just a little bit.
So
all of us.
Yeah, like
how do we as the public filter through it?
Absolutely.
Like one of the best ways is to find a reputable news source, such as the company you work for. And you still have to filter it a little bit, but yeah, it's the problem is I think, and what do you think about that? Is like I said before, you have that social media journalism. You have anybody who wants to can have their voice heard across tens of thousands of people or more because of the platforms that are out there. Whereas before it was the guy on the corner on the Apple box.
Yeah, with the tinfoil hat yelling.
Or yelling handing out the little papers to the people, the little
that was the only interaction you had with Crazy Bob.
Yeah.
Now Crazy Bob has 10,000 followers on Instagram.
Yeah,
exactly.
Or TikTok.
Yeah.
Or Twitter.
So how's your company, or how have you sort of combated that fake news? What are the things that you've done?
I mean, I think a lot of it is in part relying on reputation. You kind of know the news outlets who've been around for a really long time, who've been doing the kind of coverage you can trust for a really long time. And I think for us, we put a really solid focus on sourcing our stories. And I think that's really the grounded piece of it, right? I mean, fake news is fake at its source. There's no, there's no basis of fact behind fake news.
Have you been able to do any stories that clear up any fake news? Like whether it's recent or old, like, I mean, there's always been stories that have come to your desk and you're like, that doesn't sound right. And have you been able to write stories that clarify that with the truth?
Again, like it's like it just flies out of my brain. I'm like, I don't know what I write ever. I do several stories a day and I don't remember any of them.
Do you remember any story that you can think back on that you're like, this is one of the best or most revealing stories? Like when you were doing the research and things like that, anything that comes to mind at all that like you were just like, oh, this kind of changes how I look at this? Or
I mean, my body of work is a little less investigative than that. I've kind of picked up a lot of community beats. One story that I think, for me at least, was very eye-opening, and I'm hoping was eye-opening for the people who read it. I recently wrote a story with the Comeback Society in Regina, and they're a nonprofit group working to combat food insecurity, specifically within Indigenous populations within Regina. And they did this really cool thing where they went out to Pepikasis Cree Nation in partnership, butchered a buffalo, and then broke it right down to, all the parts, took the meat to then supplement their meal program in the city. As this, like, it was a reclamation, really. It was kind of taking back this, like, traditional food source in a way that's supporting the most vulnerable of their community.
Right.
And I think...
And they can't get out of the inner city to go do that. Because they're not on the reserves. They're not on the land that allows them to do that.
Yeah, a lot of the people who are going to benefit from this meat source have maybe never had buffalo in their lives. And that's just kind of unthinkable for the Indigenous culture. I mean,
that's very cool.
Yeah, the basis of
to know and to find that and know, like, I didn't know that was going on. To find that and see that happening in real life is...
And so part of that was getting to talk to, like, elders and, kind of cultural experts, so to speak. I don't love that phrase, but getting to speak with people who really understand, like, the tradition behind something like that and why it's so important. For me, that was really cool. For me, I felt like that.
Yeah, I hope that did come across in your story, because I mean that type of community exposure for all of the communities, not just the Indigenous, but here we are sitting as two very white men. And I apologize for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is,
because my ancestors did come to this country and enslave thousands.
I got the chance to be kind of the white girl hovering on the edge of this really interesting process that I've never seen before,
and appreciate it for what it was,
and to be welcomed, to have it explained to me, to better understand.
That opens up the doors for everything, like the whole reconciliation process. Really,
their opportunity to share culture without that filter that everyone has, the stereotype that we've had for the past 100 years of what that culture is. It's when you get a true view into it that you would provide. That's really what you're saying. Journalism is being able to provide that.
Yes, yeah. So I went out and I did the thing and I saw the stuff and then I wrote about it. And I'm hoping that my readers read that story and better understood kind of the nuances of why this is so important to Indigenous people in Saskatchewan.
Yeah. So with that, reaching back into their history and their culture, how do you, and this comes to you and both your, the Post, how do you move that into the ether of reaching people? Like, are you and the Post and these media outlets, are you just doing the Post and the online stuff? Are you posting those, like when you have an experience like that yourself, are you able to or allowed to post that to your Instagram, post that to your Twitter and reach your followers specifically with those same stories? Or do you have to do the full, go through the Post and do their stuff first Like, are they encouraging you to do both and try and be? I mean, something like that to me should be clickbait. That's the type of stuff. If you put the right headline on it,
Yeah.
you know.
Headlines.
But it is. That's what headlines are. They are the clickbait. Like you need to get whether the words make any sense at all. You know, Aboriginal people murder buffalo. Oh, okay, great. What's this? Oh, and then murder it for children to eat, showing people like.
And print has always had that. The headline on a newspaper has always been make them buy the newspaper.
Oh yeah, short, snappy, hits you hard. You look at it and you go, oh my God, what is
and then
that?
you want to see that story, so you buy it, and then you read the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that kind of boils down to headline writing. Like we try to do that with all our headlines. Not in necessarily a clickbait way. I mean, it is and it isn't. Clickbait is like, it has such negative connotations.
It does.
Most of the time.
It's a hook. You want the hook.
The hook.
Yeah, it's really kind of like aggravating the basics of journalism, right? Because that's what headline writing is. You're trying to hit all the kind of keywords that are going to catch people's attention and get them to pick up the story. In that particular case, that was a story that I kind of had an exclusive on. And so I posted a little bit about it on my Twitter while I was working on it, shared the link afterwards. But I really wrote it not in the sense that I expected people to stumble upon it on Google. So I wasn't really thinking that way about my headline.
Do they at the Post and stuff, do they help you guys with that? Do they give you media coaching and Twitter? Because you're the younger generation of journalism. Like you really are. When we talk to some of the older generation, I mean, you're talking people 20 years our senior sometimes.
Yeah.
And we know how to do social media a little bit in our 40s, but I mean, nothing what the 20-somethings and the teens are doing now. Like,
oh God, yeah. I have some fascinating stats on engagement via social media.
Right?
It's yes and no. So I think this kind of goes back to like what I said about how everything is going super digital, right? Like traditional media is moving towards these super digital platforms. Part of that is social media engagement. Part of that is what we call search engine optimization.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys know about that. Yeah.
I know about that too. Yeah.
So those are things that more and more journalists are having to train with. My Twitter account is my own. It's personal. It's not company affiliated, which I think is the case for most journalists on Twitter. It's kind of just a platform for us to be more visible, to share more content that way. Folks who are searching for it, but our actual stories, we absolutely have to do that digital training. We're becoming multimedia journalists more so than ever.
And
really.
You have to, because I mean, people aren't buying the physical paper the way they were.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't get delivered to every home on the street like it used to.
No, and we actually
had those paper routes as a kid.
We actually don't even print every single day anymore. We print 5 days a week instead of 7. So
yeah, it used to be the Sunday was the big thick paper that had all the extra stuff in it.
All the flyers. Oh God, I hated Sundays.
Now it's Saturday.
But no, it was that you had all the extra stuff. You had the week in review. You had the stories that were like, this is when you had the first one, like here's the big headline.
Yeah.
And now here's the follow up.
Yeah, we had like the big like national inserts.
Yeah.
And yeah, now that's more so our Saturday paper. It's still smaller than it used to be. But we don't print on Sundays, at least not in Regina.
Yeah.
Of course, every newspaper is different. And we don't actually print on Mondays. We put out an e-paper instead of a print edition. It's all.
And have you guys seen a lot of people grabbing the side of the papers, or has that gone down too?
I don't.
You don't see that
I
side
don't
of
know
it?
exact numbers, but I'm going to say probably not a lot of uptake. Certainly not as much as our like print circulation would be. And I think, again, it's in part that all of that content is already on the site in perhaps a more accessible format than like a laid out newspaper PDF, essentially.
So how have you seen, I mean, you've worked here in smaller industries, but you're at a big Post. How do you guys compete with like things like, I mean, that I see is like the Discover Moose Jaw, Discover Swift Current, those types that have multiple media outlets because they advertise on their own radio stations about their own print media that is on a website. Like they tie into each other. And is that, Do you see the posts and things like that possibly partnering with media outlets to do that? Or do you guys already do that?
So like internally, we kind of already do that a little bit. Like post media content we're chain wide. So sometimes our content gets pulled to Ontario outlets, like pops up in Toronto, pops up in Ottawa, pops up on like in the other side of the coast in BC. We share content that way. But because we're subscription based, so our content is behind a paywall after a certain amount of free articles. We do a lot of our advertising like that internally. Like once you're a subscriber, you can get signed up for newsletters. You can you can do a digital subscription with your print subscription and get kind of some of that insider connection. And it's because we are a subscription based model that our platform is very kind of tight knit
within
in
itself.
that way. Yeah.
So have you had any stories that left here and gone other places? Have you had any that have gone national?
Ooh, that's a good question. I wrote a story coming out of the tragedy out at James Smith Cree Nation. I attended the press conference where the provincial coroner declared we were going to have inquests, 2 of them, for coming out of that tragedy for the victims and the deaths that happened. That story got picked up nationally. Page counts went like crazy. Yeah. It was wild to watch those numbers jump. And that was actually the story that I got invited onto a podcast out of Alberta for to speak about, because I was in that room. I asked those questions. You
had firsthand knowledge of what secondhand knowledge technically, but you had,
maybe not the sexiest story.
But still, something you can write home about and say, Mom, look what I did.
That was a moment where there were a lot of eyes on Saskatchewan following that story.
And that really, I think that's what blew up the other residential schools and residential, well, we need to start looking at all the rest of these too.
It was.
It really did start out here.
It was one of those moments where our team, our newsroom, both in Saskatoon and Regina, we really came together because we knew this was vital coverage. This was so important to do right. And I think that we proved that there was value in having boots on the ground in that way.
That's good.
For a national chain.
Yeah, not just relying on bloggers to show up and tell the story.
Yeah, because again, we're journalists. We have that kind of training. We have that kind of ideology to approach stories like that in a certain way.
Well, and you're right. You approach it in a certain way that is understanding and empathetic. Whereas that blogger, that videographer that's just trying to get the clickbait, trying to get the story sold to the media outlets, he's going in there and asking unfriendly questions. He's asking, so were any of your kids murdered? Oh, well, then I don't want to talk to you. Like, it's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what they're looking for.
Honestly, some of the hardest coverage I've ever had to do, I've ever had to
the well. I can feel the welling up in my throat just thinking about it. I can't imagine actually being on site asking questions.
I was in Regina. I was part of the team that was trying to. Oh, this is going to sound so icky, but I was trying to identify victims, just to see if we could offer an outlet if anybody wanted to talk. If anybody was feeling like they just needed to get the emotions of what was happening off of their chest. And so I wasn't on the reserve. I wasn't on James Smith, but I was the person looking up all of these details about these people who just lost their lives. And it was heart-wrenching.
Yeah. Honestly. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just on.
we all just need to take.
I'm just going to go to something else here. I'm actually on the Regina Leader Post webpage here, and I'm on your page.
Okay.
And I've been scrolling through, and I'm looking back at there's articles. There's quite a lot of articles here, and they're all across the board.
They certainly keep me busy. I'm what's typically described as just a general newsroom reporter. So I do kind of maintain a beat. I try to keep my eye on health. I try to keep my eye on education, but I am also kind of a floater. Whatever needs a body to pay attention to it.
Well, you've got to be versatile. If you're locked into sports, well, when COVID happens and sports shut down, you're out of a job.
It looks like you have and I'm just stating this as what I've seen. I'm scrolled through like 8 pages already of articles, and
That's like what, last week?
no, this is back to November.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple months.
But it looks like the majority of your articles, they do have a focus. You have a lot of First Nations that you do. There's health, family, like they have a lot of things like the homeless shelters and Planned Parenthood and school and things like that. So yeah, it definitely looks like just looking at this, I could see that you focus a lot on things that are very close to people.
Yeah, it's absolutely an interest of mine. Like that's part of why I like what I do is I like the humanity of it. I think that's what really kind of draws me into journalism as a career path. There's just so many stories out there and so many voices to hear, and I get to be the person who makes sure they're heard
and articulate what they might not be able to say in a way that makes them understood.
Yeah, it's
because that's what I find when like we did interviews for the gamers and stuff. Me and you, we could talk, but if we brought any of the other nerds in, they'd look at you and go, "Oh, pretty girl, I don't know what to say." I played Dungeons and Dragons, and I roll dice. And you'd come across and be like, "Yeah, he's really passionate about, playing his Dungeons and Dragons." And he, and you would put words in their mouths that they want to say but aren't able to.
Well, I'm happy that there was no hard feelings about me doing.
No.
I guess.
No, we appreciate it every time you came out to, harass all the nerds.
I actually love that. I look at interviews as they're interviews, of course, right? On the record, technical, but you're asking questions. But they're more so about making a connection with a person and trying to draw their words out and share them with a bigger audience.
No, and that's and if we can keep more people like you doing what you do to tell whether it's your truth or someone else's truth without influence from money, like mass media telling you what you need to tell, then but it's going to be hard. It's, and that's why I was asking the question about like, how do you make yourself more relevant by posting to Twitter, by posting to these social medias to try and drown out the noise of the people we shouldn't be listening to.
I think it can be a double-edged sword, taking that approach, because you kind of run the risk of presenting yourself as like a personality. And then you lose some of that
credibility.
Well, yeah, you lose some kind of like that where you, as a journalist, you're trying to kind of be in the background and not insert yourself into a story. And I think when you are turning to social media and trying to produce content to get engagement,
I could see that.
It becomes a very blurry line. It can be really difficult to toe. And so I try not to approach my social media that way. I'm trying to, share my work as it stands and not kind of promote
yourself.
myself.
I've found social media is more opinion based.
But
It is.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But
it's a weird line for journalists because you do have to kind of market yourself, especially in an industry with this kind of turnover, where you move outlets as often as some of us do. You do have to kind of market yourself and promote yourself and sort of develop a voice that's yours. But what you really want to do is do it in your writing more so than, be a social media personality. At least I think so.
Yeah.
Not everybody might agree with me.
No, and I think some can do both and some have done both. But, as long as their news, as long as their stories are, like you say, true to heart and true to the people they're reporting about, they can still have the personality to try and sell that as well.
Absolutely.
You can have it's no different than your business, really, like than the Post selling you and your articles.
Yeah, you have to kind of just keep thinking about the responsibility angle of it.
Yeah.
That you have a responsibility to the public to do a good job, essentially. Right?
Well, if we could get more journalists and more people to think like that, I think we'd have a lot better better chance at getting the truth, the actual truth about things, and the heart stories in behind some of the nasty. So
Yeah. And maybe I'm just a small fish in a small pond here in Saskatchewan.
You moved to a bigger pond anyways.
I did. I moved to a slightly bigger pond.
So what do your mom and dad think of what you do?
Incredibly proud, actually. My mom is probably half of the page views on my stories.
She's your cheerleader.
Yeah, if I were to actually dig into the data and look at like who's reading my stuff.
So is your mom
somewhere.
here in Moose Jaw then? Where is she?
I grew up just outside of Moose Jaw, so she's in my hometown, about an hour or so away.
Where's that?
Central Butte.
Oh, she's
Shout
in the
out.
Butte. Yeah.
And so she's a little disappointed when I moved further away to Regina, and she tells me all the time, oh, people come up to me and tell me they miss you in Moose Jaw in the paper, and that's always nice to hear. But she's very proud.
Well, that's why we
and so is
had
my
you
dad,
back here.
of course, but he's not online as much as my mom. So
Well, we can definitely we'll send you the podcast once we're done, and you can share it with her. And,
Oh, she'll
and
be so excited.
actually, my wife she works at Connexus, and they have a branch in Central Butte, so they're out there 2 or 3 times a week. So I'll make sure to share it with the branch.
nice.
And then your mom will, then people will be coming, oh, we heard your daughter on a podcast.
I actually hadn't gotten around to telling her that I was doing this tonight, so that's why my phone's been so quiet. If I had told her, it'd be
Blowing up.
pinging. She'd be wanting to know how it's going.
Well, yeah, I think we've got a lot of stuff here from you.
You know, all the questions that I had, like topics and things, you sort of hit them without us having to ask.
Cool.
So,
Nice. I'm not used to being the interviewee. I'm usually the one asking the question. So that's good to hear.
yeah, on some of the ones, like really we've talked about them, like how technology has changed. You know, you said we used to be print, now it's more digital. Citizen journalism or social media journalism, technology, greater diversity and inclusion in news reporting. So, I think that would be more along the lines of like the people we were talking. I don't know if we were talking about it on while we were recording or beforehand. The freelance ones that are
Now, do you guys do you know, like, now with your layoffs and stuff at the Post, do you guys have more freelance journalists submitting to you, or is it like how?
That's a good question. And I don't know if I know the answer to that because I am
'Cause you-
admittedly the bottom of the totem pole.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I was just curious if you saw the stories and you're like, oh, I don't know that person. Like, do you know?
It is something that we do incorporate, that we do employ when we need kind of extra coverage. There's actually this really great program it's a grant program that's been running for a couple of years. It's called the Local Journalism Initiative. So there's actually a reporter based out of Saskatoon that's produced a lot of fantastic content as somebody who's being essentially funded through that program. We pull in freelancers. It's becoming probably increasingly more likely given newsrooms keep shrinking.
And the profits keep shrinking.
Yeah. And so it's maybe a little more cost effective to do contracting that way, which
Where are you
but-
based out of now? Because I know where you were is now the Sky Gym or something.
we actually don't have an office space.
Oh, no.
We are fully work from home. That was an announcement that came down from Post Media right around those layoffs that happened in January. Both Saskatoon and Regina newsrooms are fully remote now.
No.
We're not going back to an office.
Tax write-offs, I guess, because home office.
Yeah, well,
keep your receipts.
They're actually selling the printing press up in Saskatoon.
Oh, okay.
So, of course, in the building, you can't. You can, but it's very difficult to take those
and
out
use
of
them
buildings
somewhere,
and
because
take
the
them
buildings
somewhere
were built around them.
else. Yes, essentially, they're big machines. So that was kind of, I think, a cost-cutting attempt.
Are you doing a story on that?
Star Phoenix did. They actually did a really great piece saying goodbye to the press.
Yeah.
We've outsourced our printing, and it's no longer running. And
That's
for the first
crazy.
time in like 80 some years.
Oh yeah, that's the crazy part. Like
Yeah.
a piece of machinery that, minor modifications, but that's been running for that long.
Yeah.
And the amount of, when you look at the numbers of like the millions and millions, almost probably billions of pages that machine has printed in the 80 some years.
Oh God, yeah.
It's staggering. You could make piles to the moon and back kind of thing. Like,
Oh, totally. And it's something I'm actually really regretful that I'll never experience because I've never worked in an office that had a press in the building. But I hear through the great wisdom of my colleagues that it's something like it shakes the building. Just the sheer force of it when the press starts up, you know.
Well, see there's next time you go to New York or somewhere like that, you go to the New York Times and say, "Hey, can I come in and see your press?
Sit on your floor for like a bit."
And that typical thing.
I've got a press pass.
You always used to hear, "Stop the presses."
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore. So
no, now it's like a Slack message.
yeah.
Hey, wait up! Can I change this?
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't quite have the same gravitas.
Yeah. So, and then the only last thing that I really have here is the challenges in the area of privacy and security with digital news. Like,
are there things that you've had to implement and change just in your short career that?
I think one of the biggest challenges in terms of privacy is going to be for newsrooms who don't have a physical space. This is actually something that I'm bumping up against with a story I'm working on that I can't talk about in detail, but it's a story where I'm meeting with a source who has something they want to tell me, but it's personal. It's private. It's not something you want to sit in a coffee shop and just talk about where anybody can hear. And so normally you would have a newsroom, you would have a conference room, you'd have some kind of a space where you could invite them to meet you, sit down, close the door. Nobody else can hear you.
Even their family.
Yeah,
like
and
you can go to their
conversation.
house and their family can overhear, or they can come to your house and your family can overhear. This is a neutral space.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing with like having a box number for if sources want to mail you documents. Physical, like paper documents, which that is the safest way to provide documents to a news outlet because sending them digitally has a trail.
Yeah, and now sending them to who? To your newsroom.
Right.
Who distributes those? Who picks those up? Where do those get stored?
Exactly.
So that if it comes back on us, oh no, we have this. Like,
exactly. So now the onus is on me to find those safe spaces, to figure out a way to get those documents and keep them safe in my home, because that's where I work from now, and to take care of them and make sure that they're not at risk in any way. And then I'm also having to think about my own safety because
exactly.
You don't want to just hand out your home address to anybody.
Like we were talking about before with
harassment is very real. It's a very real problem, and it's kind of scary.
Sounds like we need to start having some secret meetings, and Jess will be your bouncer at the bar, and we'll hand the files under the desk.
It almost sounds like there's a need for I don't even know how to put it, like a by the hour office rental where you can arrange to have an office that has a desk and a internet access and whatever that you might need, and it's got its own privacy but you don't need it all the time.
Yeah,
with a mailing address that you can sort of use.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a solution that's coming down the chain, if that's something that might happen in the future, but like as it stands right now,
shared office space, like a hotel almost.
Yeah, like a
hotel for
seating.
reporters.
just a rotating timesheet.
It wouldn't just be for reporters. It would be for people.
It sounds like Watergate all over again.
What you've said there is, like with people working from home and they need to meet with someone or have something delivered, I work from home, and if I had to meet with somebody, I wouldn't necessarily want them coming to my house.
I have to pick up his packages at work all the time.
Yeah, but that's a good example right there. It doesn't matter who you are and what industry you work in. You want to have that neutral place that's not your home.
Absolutely, and I imagine there's probably some digital privacy concerns that I maybe not super familiar with for outlets that do have more of a digital presence. I have not encountered those as a newspaper reporter.
Well, I'm sure you get documents that are given to you that fall under like the Canadian privacy, and I can't remember what it is, PIPEDA or whatever it's called.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, where you have to make sure that it's not distributed or it can't be distributed, period.
I mean, that's a regular thing. Embargoes very much exist for media. We'll get information from, for example, government entities that say, we'll give you this early, but if you publish it before X day, X time,
You won't be getting the next one.
you will be hearing from our lawyers, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So
And we won't be doing that again. So you need to maintain that
Relationship.
that respect, that
Yeah.
trust, and it's increasingly difficult to do when you don't have a safe space.
What secrets do you know? Tell us your secrets.
That's maybe one of the other cool things about being a journalist. Sometimes you know things
Yeah.
before other people do.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Mom, don't go out today. Why?
Can't tell you.
Can't tell you.
Sometimes you're also deeply frustrated because you don't know things that you want to know,
Yeah. And you know
people
that-
won't tell you.
Yeah, and you know that they have it in their heads, and you try to pry it out. Yeah, that would.
You
So
phone the minister's
what
office.
do you know about this?
phone the police. Hey, what's going on over on
Yeah.
X Street? Oh, can't tell you. Okay,
yeah.
I'll figure it
Fine, I'll
out.
leave my house and go talk to people in the neighborhood.
Yeah, you cannot tell me. I'll figure it out. It's going to be the convoluted way.
Yeah.
No, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that there are people like you that are still looking out for everyday man, everyday woman, everyday,
Well, thank you. My plug is always to support local journalists because that's what we do best.
And how do we do that?
Buy newspapers, buy
Yeah.
subscriptions, engage
Even if you
with
don't read
us.
every single one.
Yeah, we again, we're a business, and it's very unfortunate that that's the way it is. But the best way to support us is to engage with us with our content.
Well,
Yeah.
if you need a hand when if something comes down the line and you don't have a job, let us know and we'll employ you on our Nerdish Nerdy Nerd News podcast, and you can start your social media career.
Cool. I am a pretty good copywriter. Not to toot my own horn, but
Right on.
I've done a lot of writing in my short life.
Well, and Talon could help with that too.
Yeah.
Or one of our guests and friends, Talon, the vice president of the Gamers. He's well, you've probably interviewed him for his political life
Oh
as well.
yeah, I actually know him quite well.
Yeah.
I went to high school with his wife.
Oh, really?
I know Talon quite well.
That's a small circle because they
Yes.
are literally a block away. Yeah. Oh, awesome. No, that's been really great getting to know you and getting to know what you're up to and how everything's going in the world of journalism. I'm glad it's still going.
Yes,
I'm
we
glad there
are.
is a career called journalism still.
Yeah, we are still fighting to do our best.
That's awesome.
So,
Yeah, I can remember the paper being delivered and my dad taking one part and my mom taking the other part. And then they'd switch. And I can remember when I was...
And we'd steal the comics.
Yeah. Well, no, even when I was older, because, I'm old enough to remember reading the newspaper, be it the Leader Post or the Times Herald when it was here. And it just is different than the digital one. You'd sit back, you'd read the paper, you'd peruse it, and you'd see all the different articles. And it was just a different experience than it is now.
It is, absolutely. And I'm happy to report that there is a very voracious appetite for the comic section and the word search and all the puzzles, like the puzzles page. Yeah, big hit still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
We get lots of emails about it.
And the astrology section.
Yeah, any kind of like minor, tiny little change
Yeah.
gets
They
attention.
still publish. Do they still publish Dear Abby and stuff like that?
Ooh, I don't know if it's every day, but I think they do.
Yeah?
Occasionally, yeah.
Those were pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, my thing is always to tell people, just keep buying newspapers. We have value, I promise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
do.
you filter through the garbage for us.
We really, really do. I mean, I don't know anybody who sits through council meetings for fun. But we're at city council all of the time, all the meetings. We will read those reports for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for coming. This has been great.
Yeah, it's great to talk. I don't often get to talk about journalism for an hour straight. So
Well, we'll have to have you come back again and talk about something else too, like maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We always love having talkative guests because
Cool.
Jess and I have brain farts and we just sit there staring off into. It's nice to have someone that can kind of cover us.
If like in the future, if you have an article that you've published and you want to do maybe a discussion about, we're more than happy to.
Then we would help
Cool.
facilitate it if you wanted to have someone come and we all sit and talk.
cool. I'll keep that in mind.
All right.
Great.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks again for letting us into your ear holes with this Nerdish Nerdy Nerd News podcast. Check out our website at wildshot.ca.
You can find us on all the socials under Nerdish Nerdy Nerd News. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe and support us at patreon.com/nerdish to get more bonus content, show notes, and merch.
If you'd like to send us topics for future episodes or comment about our existing ones, please email us info@wildshot.ca. And remember, stay nerdy.
Nerdish Nerdy Nerd News.